Good evening and welcome. It's good to see everyone here. We are in our sixth class for the second cycle as we are working through it one period at a time. And so tonight we'll be talking about the wandering in the wilderness. I will do a little bit of recap of the end of the Exodus that I was unable to complete last Wednesday. But I looked up and it was 20 after and I was like, oh no. Because I didn't leave Zach much time, and that just pushed everything. So it'll be all right. We'll go quickly through those, but it's good to see everyone here. Appreciate you being here. If you are using the books, we are finishing Volume 2 today, and so the next two periods will come out of Volume 3, the Invasion and Conquest and the Judges. So just if you're keeping up with that, that's where I'm looking to most of my material as far as just the outline and structure of what we're discussing. I mean, the material ultimately comes from here. Brother Waldron just took the time to put it in plain English and kind of streamline it. And when you have things coming from different sources, to unify them in one location. If you're familiar with like a harmony of the gospel, that's kind of that of the whole scripture. But before we get into our study, I've asked Lance to lead us in a word of prayer.
Amen.
All right, we're going to do just a quick memorization review and then get on into some things. So let's start with just going through our time periods. So let's do that together. For the flood, gathering of the people, patriarchs, Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest, judges, united kingdom, divided kingdom, Judah alone, Judah in captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, life of Christ, early church, and letters to the Christians. All right, getting better. We're seeing that very quickly. What we've been doing so far, we've gone through the period of before the flood, and we saw the linking story. That's what I'm talking about, connecting the dots here. Before the flood, and then we see the chapter 5, the generations, connects us to the next period. So we got to the flood, and then we had chapter 10 connect us with more generations. Got to the scattering of the people. We had more generations in chapter 11, so that connects those dots. After those three, starting to get into more of the storyline, because it focuses more, we have the patriarchs. And the linking story there is that of Joseph, that Joseph saved his family and brought them to Egypt. So that is the story from the patriarchs of how it connects us to the Exodus. They got into Egypt, and so now the Exodus is where the spies report and the people rebel. And so the Exodus, they leave, and now that's what transitions us to the wandering in the wilderness. And so hopefully you're able to think, I think of it linearly. I don't know if that's how you would explain it, but just this, like dominoes, one right after the other, that we can see this event that led to this event that led to this event. So they're each kind of chain links. And then tonight we're going to go through the wandering in the wilderness, and hopefully if we get to the very end of all of our slides, we'll see Joshua 1 through 5, where we have the crossing of the Jordan, the partaking of the land, and observing of the Passover. And that's kind of what leads us into the invasion and conquest that we'll talk about on Wednesday. And so that's kind of the linking stories. Hopefully you're able to think of them that way. We'll keep circling back to that, and you'll be able to see those connections. Major events, we remember these: creation, Adam and Eve. What's chapter 3? First sin. Chapter 4, Cain and Abel. And chapter 5, generations. All right, and when we get to the flood, remember the flood has 6 items, and I mistaught it the first time, so I'll do a little better for you this time. Starts with the flood itself, and then think of the next 5 things. What do we have? Meat given for food. Very good, Harley. Rainbow covenant, yes. Capital punishment in the rainbow covenant. Then we have the curse of Canaan. And then last one, generations again. And so we see those. So we have 5 of those in the first one and then 6 of them in this one. Get to the scattering of the people, there's only 3. Remember these? You have the towers built. That's right, building of the tower. The languages are divided. And then more generations again. So we see those major events. And then the patriarchs, to me, it's super easy because you've got to remember just a few names. We had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the story of Joseph, which connects us to the Exodus. This is where I've got to work on memorizing these for myself because is there 13, I think, in this one? So we have Israel is in bondage. Then we have Moses' birth. He's raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He's rejected by his people, flees to the wilderness, the burning bush, plagues, and the crossing of the Red Sea, which we talked about all of those last week on Wednesday. Yes, sir. Absolutely. What I will do, and I'm actually a little bit behind on doing this, I will link each class period's files to that master spreadsheet. And so it'll be connected there. I know I've done the first few, but I've gotten a couple classes behind about linking those files. But yes, on the spreadsheet, it's on the website, it's on the app. You can click on it and it'll pull those up. But those will be available to you. So we got to the crossing of the Red Sea. We talked about that, and we kind of rushed through these last few. The trip to Sinai, events at Mount Sinai, trip to Kadesh, spies set into the land, and Israel refuses to go in. So, yes, they are all in here, but if you want it on your phone, you can have it on your phone too. So, but yes, everything, it's everything on that I'm going through here is in the small green book. That's, what is it, page 19, 20, something like that. Yep, starts on page 19, the second cycle with all of those items, and we are up to page 21 through today with the wandering. So that's where we are. Just really quickly, finishing the Exodus from the other evening, we talked about God making the covenant there in chapter 19. That's a big deal. Didn't want to miss the point that the covenant that God made with the children of Israel. And we see that he offers that covenant, and we see that the covenant is ratified. When something is ratified, what does that mean? It's made official. It is accepted. It is signed. It is notarized. It is delivered to the judge. He rules on it. It's in place. It's the legal binding thing. The ink wasn't even dry. He was up on the mountain, and we know the story of the golden calf. We saw how quickly the covenant was broken. And when we talk about the covenant being broken, that's a big deal too. I want to make sure that we see that. I want to make a big deal that God, Jehovah, makes a covenant with his people, and how big of a deal it is also that the people broke that covenant. Crawford pointed this out. It's also pointed out in the book about if you look at that section and then skip chapters 25 to 31 and you jump in at chapter 32, you see the things that are going on. And it helps you see that point. Once the people sin and their covenant is broken, they're at the beginning of chapter 32, God is ready to destroy the people. That's how serious it was. And so they ready to destroy the people, but Moses intercedes. I want you to make sure that you see the parallelism that we have here with the children of Israel and Moses, and what we have today with Christ as our intercessor. Those are not simple ironies. That is God's plan. Crawford? Right. That's right. Yeah, so there's so much parallel here, and we'll see that more as we do this in detail in cycle 3. But important stuff. As Moses came down the mountain, he saw their idolatry, breaks the stones that contains the terms of the covenant, that is, and broke the stones, which is symbolic of what they had already done with their actions in breaking the covenant. And Moses realized the seriousness of their sin, and that leads to their punishing of the guilty. But Moses intercedes again through prayer. God responds by saying he will send the people to inherit the land, but he won't go with them as he intended. Does that matter? What happens when they go at times without God's approval? They get destroyed. Well, that wasn't, Moses wouldn't accept the terms. He pleads to God. Like, no, we don't want to go anywhere without you. And so we see him interceding to accept the people again. And so God hears Moses' prayer and renews the covenant. If you don't see grace, if you don't see mercy in this back and forth, even though they were a sinful, rebellious people, but because of their intercessor who was able to bring forth favorable terms for them, very important stuff. So the covenant is renewed, and Moses continues to intercede for them, working on their behalf. And he renews his covenant. Moses returns with the tablets of stone. Now, so getting to the months at Mount Sinai, I did make this point that they had their own law. They were a distinct people, and God was made their king. The fulfillment of the nation promise completely in its fullness. We also saw, while at Mount Sinai, the tabernacle, the instructions that are given there. And we're not going to go into detail for that. We'll spend time on that later. But we see the garments for the priests. And they got 2 chapters just about what the priests wore. It was detailed. It was pertinent. Now, why would that be preserved for us today? There's things we can learn from this as well. We'll talk about that more. Then the rules for sacrifice and what that looked like. And then worship being set in order. And as they're getting close to here to the end, the people are numbered and organized as far as how they were to encamp and how God was giving them orders. And at this numbering, that's when they realized that everyone from the previous generation was gone. It had come to pass what God had said. Oh, nope, that's the wrong part. That was not there yet. That's the one right before. All right. Yes, sir. That's right. And in very specific ways. It reminds me of Esther when perhaps for such a time as this, he provided her and put her in the position to do. Well, we see that same way with the building of the tabernacle, the building of the temple later on. We see God supplying the needs of the people and giving them the capability to do what he commanded of them to do. That's right. And so all of this is a pattern for us to recognize, because that's true for us today. It's been throughout history, throughout his people, and continues to persist for us. During from Sinai to Kadesh, we had issues and issues is a nice word, at Taberah, Kibroth Hattaavah, and Hazeroth. So we see the things going on there. At Taberah, fire broke out among the people because of their complaining. At Kibroth Hattaavah, they complained about wanting meat, and God gave them quail, but many died in a plague. And it's all back to their complaining. Then we say Hazeroth, Miriam, and Aaron criticized Moses for marrying the Cushite woman. So we see that there at Hazeroth, and we see what happens to Miriam at that point. Contracts leprosy there. Obviously, God did not appreciate her pressing against the Lord's chosen, or his leadership. And then finally, the sin at Kadesh Barnea. So we have the 12 spies, and they come back with their bad report after being in the land for 40 days. When they heard the report, the 10 spies said, they have walled cities, it's full of giants. And so the people grieved. Because now what? We don't want to go back to Egypt. We don't want to go to the wilderness. And we can't go take this. That was their attitude. Was that true? With God, they could have, but they had a lack of faith. And so that's where it transitions us. The spies is that transition story to the wandering in the wilderness. Yes, sir. All right. Sorry about that. Apparently doubled that slide. So now to the wandering in the wilderness. So they are sentenced to wander in the wilderness. How long were they sentenced? 40 years. 1 year for every day that they were in the land. They had already been, once they did the 18 months, it was 2 months from Egypt to Sinai. And then while they were at Sinai, they were there 18 months. And so now that they've been at Kadesh Barnea, it's getting close to the 2-year mark. And so 40 years, they actually wandered for 38 because those two counted as time served, I guess, for lack of better words. And so the first big event that we came into was Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, as far as in the wandering of the wilderness. What's that about? What's Korah, Dathan, and Abiram? The earth ate them. Yes. Why did the earth eat them? They rebelled against Moses. What were they fussing about?
They wanted to be priests.
They wanted to be priests, but what had God said? Who were the priests?
Aaron's descendants.
Aaron's descendants. And those were the people that were supposed to be offering sacrifices. And so it seems almost to be a point of pride and contention. And so the earth opened up and swallowed them because of them and their rejection. And so the story immediately after that is about Aaron's rod that budded. What was that a sign of? What does that process look like? Why did his rod bud? That's right. God had chosen Moses and Aaron, and so they had taken a staff from each tribe, and that was the one that budded for God's to have shown His approval to. And so that's the story we see there. And then we get to Miriam's death. Who was Miriam again? Moses' sister. We do see a few things about her that were not flattering, but overall, what do we know about her? She was loyal to Moses. She was a good person overall, but had moments of weakness. After that, we have the sin of Moses and Aaron. What's the sin of Moses and Aaron? Did not regard God as holy. And that manifests in what? Moses striking the rock, and then almost, if you read the text, it almost seems like he speaks kind of coarsely to the Israelites, taking a little bit of the credit on himself instead of giving God the glory. Crawford? That's right. And so God would have been just to put them to death just like He did Nadab and Abihu. He did. That's I think almost the very next thing or getting close to it. And so it's an important thing, and that's what cost Moses from being able to go into the promised land. Not immediately. It was just shortly thereafter. Well, he wasn't allowed to go into the land. We do know that. But I don't know that he was ever promised to do that.
What?
Yeah, verse 24 of chapter 20. Well, that's I guess for Moses' sake, he didn't even let Aaron see it. It says, Aaron will be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land which I have given to the sons, because you rebelled against my commandment and the waters of Meribah. So he was killed before they entered the promised land because of it. He was not allowed to go in. And similar to Moses at least got to look into the land. So we do see that. We also have, after their sin, the passing by Edom. You know, the fastest way to get somewhere is a straight line, right? Well, that was going to be through Edom. What road were they going to try to travel? It's referenced in the text. The King's Highway. They were told that they wouldn't eat anything, they wouldn't pluck anything, only thing they'd leave is footprints. Was that acceptable terms to the Edomites? No. So they were not allowed to go through, and the Israelites were not of a mindset or nature yet to try to battle them or fight them, so they had to go around. And then the next part was the death of Aaron, just immediately after that. When they couldn't go straight through, there's more grumbling and complaining, correct? And so that leads us to the fiery serpents. In the story, there's two types of serpents. The fiery ones are the bad ones. The bronze one is a good one. The fiery serpents bit them, and many died because of it, because of their complaining and grumbling yet again. But what is the remedy? What is told to them about this? If you will look at the bronze serpent, you will not die. And so Moses set it up on the pole, and then if they were bit by those fiery serpents, they'd look upon it and be saved. But many did die in that because of their grumbling and complaining. So after those stories, the story there with the fiery serpents. Sorry, Mr. Phillip?
I think it was Solomon that found it and put it up, wasn't it? Was it Solomon that found it and put it up for the people? And Hezekiah destroyed it? I remember them worshiping it, him taking it down. I thought it was Solomon that brought it back, but it may not have been. So,
but understandably, that stuck around, and that was important to them. I mean, they're in the wandering in the wilderness right now, and so they carried that with them because it meant something. It was important to them, and they're part of their history. Yes, sir. Right. My dad, growing up, is a paramedic, and on his uniform, he had that patch on his shoulder, and every time I saw it, that's what I thought about, because that's on his uniform. That's right. Somebody knew the symbolism of it, and other people didn't and didn't know to object to it, I guess. All right, and so we got through the fiery serpents, and then we start to get to some interesting things as far as battles going on. We have this first one against the Amorites and the defeating of Sihon. We get the next one, the defeating of Og there in Bashan. And so we start to see some more action back and forth. Now with this, what type of fight was against Sihon? What type of fight was it against Og? Was this 1-to-1 champion like David and Goliath situation? No, these were men of battle going in. And so we see the Israelites becoming more hardened and more road tested and a little bit more able to take care of themselves. They a chapter ago, they didn't go through Edom because they didn't want to have to face that fight. But now they're fighting Sihon, they're fighting Og, and so we get to that. So now that there's some time that passes, and we see that, which brings us to our next story with Balaam. And I'm going to let Zach go over that, but that's, I just realized I got a whole bunch of slides that I was on the wrong slide. That's all right. We'll get to him on that. But it goes from not wanting to fight to fighting and winning, and then coming to an enemy that don't want to fight them.
Just let me make a very brief aside. I know we've got a lot of material still to cover, but just want to say this. Whenever you ask God's people to pray for you, and then God answers that prayer, it's only appropriate to acknowledge Him and give Him thanks. So I sent an email out this morning with the bulletin asking you to pray for my voice. Ordinarily, when this circumstance comes around, I'm able to preach, but I'm not able to teach, and my voice is shot. but I'm at about 75%. And I had someone text me. I know several of you were praying as well. Dennis prayed at the table. And so just want to acknowledge God's working and preserving my voice so that I'm able to teach this evening. And, ordinarily, I'd be gone by this point in time. But y'all have heard that before. So anyway, just wanted to stop and give God thanks for hearing and recognition for answering that prayer. All right. Balaam's story, which is going to begin in Numbers chapter 22. Let's just kick off this section by reading the first 6 verses, and then we'll kind of run through the events. The first 6 verses set the stage for what's going to happen, as Luke talked about. Israel, and word of their victory has been spreading, and that's why the Moabites, who you've got Balak, who is king of the Moabites, doesn't want to engage Israel. So Numbers 22, starting in verse 1, then the people of Israel set out and camped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan at Jericho. And Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was in great dread of the people, because there were many. Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, this horde will now lick up all that is around us, as the ox licks up the grass of the field. So Balak the son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Balaam the son of Beor at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the people of Amal, to call him, saying, behold, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth, and they're dwelling opposite me. Come now, curse this people for me, since they're too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land. For I know that whom you bless is blessed, and whom you curse is cursed. So the children of Israel are camped here at the plains of Moab. They're right on their back door. And unsurprisingly, having seen what God had done, Yahweh has done, he is afraid. So we take time to look at that. Did you need to
No,
talk
go
about
ahead.
that? Okay. All right. So you've got Balak, king of Moab, summoning Balaam, who was... It's interesting to think about what Balaam was. He was many things. The Lord did seem to speak to him, but he also seems to be a diviner. Whenever you look into the practices and particular ways that he seeks to communicate with God, it seems to take in some of the elements of witchcraft that were common to that day. So anyway, we can talk about him when we get to cycle 3 a little bit more. But let me just ask this question. Were the Israelites a threat to the Moabites? I thought some people might say that. I'm going to go as far to say no. Who did Moab descend from? Remember? He descended from Lot. And you may remember Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 9, and the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab or contend with them in battle, for I will not give you any of their land for a possession. So could they have been a threat to Moab? Absolutely. But God had commanded, because you've got Lot, who was Abraham's nephew, and you've got the people of Moab who have descended from Lot. God tells him, hey, I've given them their portion of the land, and I'm going to give you your portion. You're not to mess with them. Okay, you're to leave them alone because of Lot's connection to Abraham. So anyway, Balak isn't aware of that, so he calls Balaam, and he says, I want you to come curse this people. We can't defeat them on our own, and I know your history. Whom you curse is cursed. Whom you bless is blessed. That's kind of an interesting phraseology. Kind of takes us back to Genesis chapter 12, where God offers Abraham, and by extension of that, Abraham's people, the Israelites, this divine protection. Who curses you will be cursed, and who blesses you will be blessed. So we're going to see Moab and Balaam and Balak try to curse the Israelites, and we're going to see the consequence of that through God's divine protection to them. So whenever the men come to Balaam, he says, let me ask God before I go. And God says no. So he goes and he tells them, no, I can't go. So Balak sends more important messengers. And he says, let me go ask him again. God already told him no, but he says, let me go ask him again. God says, go. Interestingly, when you see this next section happening in verse 22, God told him he can go, but he's going to punish him for going. I think that's because he already told him. He was persistent. Okay, you want to go? You can go. So God was going to punish him. We know how the angel is standing there as he's traveling to the plains of Moab, ready to strike him down. 3 times his donkey sees the angel and saves him. The 3rd time, after he starts beating the donkey, God opens the donkey's mouth and he speaks to Balaam. Strangely enough, Balaam speaks back, and all of a sudden his eyes are opened and he's able to see the angel that was going to destroy him. And from that point on, he's permitted by God to go. But yet the Lord says, only say the things that I tell you to say. So Balaam is essentially going to give 4 oracles where on 4 occasions he's going to try to curse the people of Israel. The first time he's looking out over all of the army and he's able to see just how massive they are. And that section, the first oracle, occurs in verses 1 through 12. And what happens is this divine reversal. And it's all rooted in the fact, remember, of God's protection of his people and God saying, you're only to speak the words that I give you. Okay, and so rather than cursing them, he blesses them. Just one particular excerpt from that, verses 11 and 12. Balak said to Balaam, what have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, and behold, you've done nothing but bless them. And he answered and said, must I not take care to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth? So God gave him the words. Moab wanted to curse. It turned out to be a blessing. So he takes them to another section and says, well, here's a small portion. Maybe you can curse this section of Israel here. And we can gain some sort of upper hand against them. Again, Numbers 23:16, the Lord met Balaam and put a word in his mouth and said, return to Balak, and thus you shall speak. This is the nature of prophecy. God gives you the word, as we see in the Old Testament and through the prophets. God gives them the word, puts it in their mouth. They speak what God has said. And Balaam's got the right idea. I can't say anything that God has not given me to say. And as false prophets arise all throughout the story of the Old Testament, you see kind of here the element of true prophecy where they simply speak the word that God put into their mouth. So again, he blesses them rather than cursing them. You have the third oracle taking place. And again, he's fussed at whenever he blesses Israel rather than cursing them. And he tells Balak, if you give me a house full of silver and gold, I can't go beyond the word of the Lord. So he realizes he can only say what God puts in his mouth. And then as he's preparing to leave, Balak says, you know what, get out of here. I brought you in to curse the enemy, but you blessed them 3 times. I'm done with you. So we see the fourth oracle as he's trying to leave. It's almost like he's overcome and must bless Israel again. And this is an interesting blessing here, somewhat of a prophetic blessing that occurs. In Numbers 24:17, he says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. Anyone know who the near fulfillment of this prophecy might be about? Okay, it's going to be about David. Oftentimes you see in prophecy a near fulfillment and then a greater, more future fulfillment. The near fulfillment being a picture or a shadow of the greater fulfillment that's going to occur. You may mark 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 2, where we read that David defeated Moab and he measured them with a line, making them lie on the ground. 2 lines he measured to be put to death, and 1 line is to be spared. So during the reign of David, Israel is able to, they go to war, and this is God sending them to war this time. This is in response to being provoked. God sends them to battle, and Moab is captured. Probably in response to what's happening here, their attempts to curse the people of God, and so that's coming full circle on them. So David is the near fulfillment of Balaam's words, and obviously the greater fulfillment of that is Jesus. Revelation 19:15, from his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. And that's a picture of not earthly nations and earthly peoples, but Jesus' victory over evil, sin, and all that opposes the kingdom of God, which all of the enemies of God are represented by the nations that would provoke him and make war against him and resist his will. All right, then in chapter 25, we see kind of a strange turn of events. Balaam does not succeed in his cursing of Israel, but what we see happening is Israel worshiping Baal of Peor, which was in very close proximity to the plains of Moab where they were at. And so you have in chapter 25, the first 3 verses there, this interrelationship that occurs with Israel and the surrounding nations. They come and they invite them into to worship their gods with them. A lot of that revolving around sexual immorality. Israel plays the harlot with these false gods, and the plague. God sends a plague among His people because of what they were doing. A very zealous priest by the name of Phinehas puts an end to the plague by going and killing a particularly significant Israelite and seems a Midianite princess or a leader, influential member of Midianite ruling families, as they were in the act of sexual immorality, and God brings an end to the plague. So the question probably is asking you, why do you have that happening? And that ties into chapter 31, where you've got Israel engaging with war against the Midianites. And this is a command God gives Moses in Numbers 31. Why did they go after the Baal of Peor? Well, it's because of the influence of Balaam. Okay, he was finally able to get what he wanted. He wanted the money. He was greedy for the wealth that was promised to him. He couldn't speak a curse on Israel, and so he more subtly tells Balak, this is how you can set a snare for the people of God, is you send the women in and you entice them to worship Baal of Peor. They did that. God struck out against that. And so he accomplished the same thing he wanted, although it was a different means. And so God says that's not going to go unanswered. He deals with the plague. He deals with the offenders. And he takes revenge on the Midianites. And we see verse 13, the kings of the Midianites, with the rest of their slain, were put to death. And also they killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with a sword. Just a brief comment that's going to have to suffice. You've got Moab, who seemed to be the offender early on. You got the Midianites here. There seems to be some sort of union going on between the two of those people. Moab realizes we can't stop Israel, so they try to buddy up with another small nation. Maybe we can join forces and defeat them. And so there's a connection between the Moabites and the Midianites, and God takes revenge on both of those nations for their resistance and for the way that they set a snare for Israel. Luke, were you wanting to jump in?
Well, I think it's on your next slide as far as verse 16.
Okay, yes. And this is the reference to Balaam's part in Midian's tempting Israel to go after their gods. Behold, these, on Balaam's advice, caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor, and so the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. So Balaam was the mastermind behind that, which led to God's breaking out in a plague against his people. And God saw that, the offenders were punished, and so were the Midianites and the Moabites for their complicity within that. All right, real quickly, the book of Deuteronomy. Anyone know what the term Deuteronomy means itself? Yeah. Second law. Second law is just a literal rendition of the word Deuteronomy. And so what you've got previously, the law had been given to that first generation that was not allowed to enter into the promised land because of their lack of faith. Deuteronomy is the giving of the law again to this new generation that is preparing to go in. This is Moses' last involvement with the people of Israel. He's not going to be allowed to enter the promised land, and so he's going to just give a recap of much of the law that was initially given to this second generation that's going to go into the land of Canaan. And in the first 4 chapters, I've just kind of broken it down like this. I'll try to do a better job of sticking to the organization in that book. That'll allow us to have some continuity. So I've just previously kind of been doing this my own way, but I'll try to stick to that to give us more continuity and make it easier for all of us to follow. The first 4 chapters, you've got an overview and a covenant reminder. So Moses reminds them this is what happened in the past that's led us up to this point, and this is what kept them out of the land. That is a lack of faith. In chapter 4 and verse 1, he begins to address this new generation. And now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the rules that I am teaching you, and do them, that you may live, and go in and take possession of the land that the Lord your God, the God of your fathers, is giving you. So this is the pep talk before Joshua takes over, and they enter into the land of Canaan, which we'll have in the invasion and conquest. In chapters 5 through 26, you've got the giving of the law. So in chapter 5, there is a reference to the 10 Commandments. Chapter 6, you've got the greatest command, which is the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. In chapter 7 through 13, you've got laws that speak of the people's need to be devoted to God. And then in 14 through 26, you've got miscellaneous laws that cover things such as clean and unclean food, tithes, Sabbaths, holy days, the cities of refuge, rules of war, and punishment upon sexual immorality. Chapters 27 through 30 bring us to a very significant section. It's almost similar to the ratifying of the covenant that we saw with this new generation. You've got the mountains of Gerizim and Ebal, which are the mountains of blessing and cursing. And so the people were making this formal reminder. 6 of the tribes stood on Mount Gerizim, which was a mount of blessing, and 6 of them stood on Mount Ebal. You want to find yourself on Mount Gerizim, of those 2 personally, I think. And so they would shout. To those on Gerizim would shout, and their voices would carry across the plain, and those on Ebal would hear them. And so the Lord will bless you if you do these things. And so it was just this very powerful vocal reminder of how God was going to bless his people if they kept his laws. And then from Mount Ebal would come the curses. This is what's going to happen if you disobey God's laws, if you go after false gods. And so the mountains of blessing and the mountains of cursing. And so you've got those events there. The covenant's renewed in chapter 29. In chapters 31 through 34, you've got Moses' final words and his death. We see Joshua being the chosen to succeed Moses, and there's some ceremony that goes on there to to show to the people that Joshua is going to be the leader of Israel. Crawford?
Seeing God's faithfulness highlighted all throughout. Only Levi were the ones that sinned in regard to Shechem. And so as a result, Jacob says, "Cursed be their anger, for it is strong, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them amongst Jacob, and I'll scatter them in Israel." The curse Jacob got them, the curse Jacob gave them, God turned into a blessing by giving people access to the priesthood all throughout.
And I think you see that too because of their events in Exodus 32, right? Whenever the sons of Levi were the ones that joined Moses in the judgment on their brothers that had sinned. And I'm wanting to say that was the event in which God told them Levi's going to be the chosen ones who serve as ministers of the tabernacle and temple later on, I believe. But you're right. You do see God's kindness to them that despite that tragic act with Shechem, way back in Genesis, God blessing them. And Simeon, they seem to kind of be scattered throughout the people. That a foretelling of the division of the land and how they're kind of scattered. It's interesting to follow Simeon's trajectory throughout the tribe of Simeon's trajectory throughout the Old Testament, even into the New. So you got Joshua to succeed Moses. You've got the Song of Moses. He teaches them a song that says, when you go bad, this is the song you're going to sing. And so it's going to be a reminder to them of the consequences of their actions whenever they did go astray. In chapter 33, you've got a blessing on Israel where he blesses each of the individual tribes, similar to what Jacob did. And then in chapter 34, you've got the death of Moses and his burial. And so here's just a very quick single-sentence summary of Deuteronomy. It can't encompass it all because there's a lot going on there. The book of Deuteronomy is Moses' final address to Israel, urging them to remember God's faithfulness, obey his covenant laws, and love him wholeheartedly as they prepare to enter the land of Canaan. So there's the book of Deuteronomy in 5 minutes.
The phrase in the book of Deuteronomy about living long in the land is repeated numerous times. And so what Moses was doing, I always think of this very similar to 2 Timothy, as Paul was giving his final words and last statement to encourage them to do right. That's what Moses is doing here. It's a little more expansive, but it's so important. It's also written in the narrative form, both here in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus. So that's why we will be including some of those major portions of those books, even though they are law in nature. But I know we've kind of done a really high view of those and skimming through them, but we'll get more details as we get into cycle 3. As we look at the last section there, in the Wandering in the Wilderness, it's the Journey's End section. If you are looking at the books, there are several things that had been going on. Like, we haven't talked about manna hardly at all, but that was going on during this time. Anybody remember what the word manna means? What is it? That's what manna means. What is this? And so they saved that, saved Aaron's rod that budded. They saved the jar of manna and put all that in the Ark of the Covenant. And so as we're going to the end of this journey, they cross over the Jordan River, and the manna that had been sustaining them for all these years, it stops. And so we see several things going on as they have crossed into the land. After they crossed the Jordan River, which, by the way, they just had their boats with them, right? I think there's a really great lesson here when the crossing in of the Red Sea and the crossing out of the Jordan River. It was miraculous in both accounts, where they entered and what came out was not the same as what went in. Yes, sir. That's exactly right. So as they've crossed the Jordan, we see the memorial stones that they set up so that this will be a remembrance that God led us in. He allowed us. He permitted us. He made the way. Every day, He made the way for them. And so when they get into the land, they're circumcised, they observe the Passover, they partake of the land, and the wandering the punishment is now over. And aren't we glad? Because now God is back to fulfilling the promises that they were supposed to have gotten 40 years earlier. If they would not have rebelled, all that hardship, all those things, the fiery serpents, the stuff, so many problems that they went through in the wilderness didn't have to be. How many times in our life do we go through way harder things if we would only do it God's way? So we'll look forward to studying through the invasion and conquest for Wednesday. But thank you for your input.
Singing that Wednesday, right?
Oh, that's right.
So next
Ooh.
Sunday.
Next Sunday, invasion.